The sun hung merciless in the cloudless sky, beating down on the parched grasslands that stretched endlessly toward the jagged mountains. Jake Sullivan guided his horse along the dusty trail, the leather of his saddle creaking with each step. He'd been riding since dawn, returning from delivering a string of horses to a ranch 3 valleys over. The weight of coins in his saddlebag should have lightened his mood, but Jake had long since forgotten what it felt like to be anything but weary. The wind kicked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. Jake pulled his hat lower, squinting against the glare. This land was unforgiving, the nearest town a full day's ride away, the nearest neighbor even further. It suited him fine. After what happened in Kansas, solitude was all he wanted. That's when he saw her. At first, Jake thought the heat was playing tricks on his eyes, but as his horse drew closer, the shape against the weathered fence post became unmistakably human. A young woman, tied with rough rope, her head hanging forward, dark hair spilling over her face like a curtain. Jake's hand instinctively went to his rifle, eyes scanning the empty horizon for danger. Nothing moved except the grass bending before the wind. He dismounted cautiously, boots hitting the hard earth with a soft thud. "Miss?" His voice came out rougher than intended, hoarse from disuse. The girl's head snapped up, revealing a face that might have been pretty if not for the swollen eye and split lip. Her dress, once blue, was torn at the shoulder, revealing bruised skin beneath, but it was her eyes that caught him, wild with terror, like a cornered animal. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and desperate. "Please don't." "Easy now," Jake said, holding up his hands. "I ain't gonna hurt you." She pulled against the ropes, wincing as they bit into her wrists. The fence post creaked but held firm. Someone had done a thorough job of it. Jake pulled out his knife, and the girl flinched violently. "Just gonna cut you loose," he said, moving slowly. The rope was thick, coarse, the kind used for cattle. It took several sawing motions before it gave way. The moment she was free, the girl stumbled forward and would have fallen if Jake hadn't caught her arm. She jerked away immediately, backing against the fence despite her obvious weakness. "Water," Jake said, unhooking his canteen from his saddle. "You need water." Her eyes darted between him and the canteen before necessity won out. She grabbed it with shaking hands, drinking so fast she choked. "Slow down," Jake advised. "Make yourself sick that way." She nodded, but kept drinking, more carefully now. When she finally lowered the canteen, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, a gesture that seemed too young for someone who looked to be about 18. "What's your name?" Jake asked. She hesitated, clutching the canteen like a lifeline. "Sarah. Sarah Mae Henderson." "Who did this to you? Sarah?" Her laugh was bitter, hollow. "My father said I was too willful, needed teaching a lesson about obedience." She touched her swollen eye gingerly. "This was for talking back. The fence was for trying to run." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his 35 years, but a father doing this to his own daughter. "Where is he now?" "Town, probably, or the saloon. Won't be back till tomorrow, if the drink takes him like usual." Sarah swayed on her feet. "Which is fine by me. Would have been dead by then anyway. Sun like this." Jake looked at her more closely. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her skin flushed with heat. Another few hours and she might have been right. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked, though he could guess the answer. She shook her head, a small, defeated gesture. "He's told everyone I'm touched in the head. No one would take me in even if I asked." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Besides, he's been trying to trade me off. Owes money to Big Tom Garrett, the smithy. 60 years old and meaner than a rattler. But Pa says beggars can't be choosing." The cold in Jake's chest turned to something harder. He'd known men like this father, men who saw their children as property to be bartered. His own sister, but no. He wouldn't think about that now. "My place ain't far," he heard himself saying. "Just over that ridge. You can rest there, get some food in you." Sarah's eyes widened. "I couldn't. People would talk. People always talk." Jake said. Don't mean we have to listen. She studied him for a long moment, this weathered stranger with calloused hands and tired eyes. Something in his face must have decided her, because she nodded slowly. Jake helped her onto his horse, noting how she winced at every movement. He'd seen men beaten in saloon fights who looked better. He walked alongside, leading the horse at a gentle pace. Why? Sarah asked suddenly. Why what? Why help me? You don't know me from Adam. Jake was quiet for a moment, listening to the steady clop of hooves on hard earth. Maybe because I've seen what happens when no one does, he said finally. They crested the ridge as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Jake's ranch spread below them, if it could be called a ranch. A small cabin, a barn that had seen better days, a corral with a few horses. It wasn't much, but it was his, bought with blood and sweat and more compromises than he cared to remember. It's perfect? Sarah breathed, and Jake looked at her in surprise. She flushed. I mean, it's peaceful, quiet. That it is, Jake agreed. He helped her down from the horse, catching her when her legs buckled. This time she didn't pull away immediately, leaning against him for a moment before finding her feet. The cabin was sparse inside. A table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner, a stove in another. Jake rarely needed more. He gestured to a chair. Sit, I'll get you something to eat. I can help. Sit, he repeated, more firmly. She sat, watching as he moved around the small space. There was something almost painful about having another person here, in this sanctuary he'd built against the world. Jake found some dried meat, hardtack, and the last of the peaches he'd preserved. It ain't fancy, he said, setting the food before her. Sarah fell on it like she hadn't eaten in days, which, Jake realized, might be the truth. He busied himself starting a fire in the stove, not wanting to stare. Thank you, she said when she'd finished. I don't know how to repay. Don't need repaying. Everyone needs something. Jake turned from the stove to find her watching him with those bruised, wary eyes. Just need you to get your strength back, he said. Then you can decide what comes next. He'll come looking, Sarah said quietly. My father, he doesn't like losing what he considers his... Let him come, Jake said, and something in his tone made Sarah shiver. As darkness fell, Jake set about making a bed in the barn. Sarah protested, saying she should be the one to sleep outside, but Jake wouldn't hear of it. Door locks from the inside, he told her. You'll be safe? She stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the lamplight. Why don't you ask? Ask what? What I did, to deserve this? She gestured to her face, her torn dress. Don't matter what you did. Jake said, nothing deserves this. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, the first he'd seen from her. She wiped them away angrily. I refused Big Tom, she said. When Pa brought him round, said I'd rather die than marry him. Pa said that could be arranged. Jake's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. You did right. Did I? Sarah laughed, but it was a broken sound. Look where it got me. Got you here, Jake said. Safe, fed, that's something. She studied him for another long moment. What's your name? I should know the name of the man who saved me. Jake Sullivan. Well, Jake Sullivan, she said softly. I won't forget this. She closed the door, and Jake heard the lock turn. He stood there a moment longer before heading to the barn. The hay was scratchy and the night was cold, but he'd slept in worse places. Through the thin walls, he could hear her crying, quiet, muffled sobs that she probably thought he couldn't hear. Jake stared up at the barn rafters, remembering another girl, younger than Sarah, who'd cried like that. His sister Emma, before the fever took her, before he'd failed to protect the one person who'd mattered. He wouldn't fail again. As the night deepened and Sarah's sobs finally quieted, Jake allowed himself to wonder what he'd gotten himself into. Come morning, there would be decisions to make. The girl couldn't stay here forever. It wouldn't be proper. And besides, Jake had chosen this solitary life for a reason. But for tonight, she was safe. That had to count for something in this hard, unforgiving land where kindness was as rare as rain. The wind howled outside, rattling the barn doors, carrying with it the scent of approaching autumn. Change was coming, whether Jake wanted it or not. He closed his eyes, one hand resting on the gun beside him, and waited for dawn. The morning sun crept through the cracks in the barn walls, waking Jake from an uneasy sleep. His back ached from the hard ground, and his neck had a crick from using his saddle as a pillow. He sat up slowly, listening. The ranch was quiet except for the horses nickering softly in their stalls. Jake walked to the cabin, hesitating before knocking gently. Miss Henderson. Sarah. No answer. Alarm shot through him. He knocked harder. Sarah, I'm here. Her voice was small, uncertain. Breakfast, Jake said, relief washing over him. I'll get something started. He heard movement inside, then the lock turning. Sarah opened the door a crack, peering out. In the morning light, her injuries looked worse. The bruise around her eye had darkened to purple-black. Her lip was still swollen. How'd you sleep? Jake asked, busying himself with starting a fire in the outdoor cooking pit. Better than I have in weeks, she admitted, stepping outside. She'd tried to fix her torn dress, he noticed, using what looked like strips from the hem to tie the shoulder together. Jake focused on making coffee and frying up some bacon. The familiar routine helped steady him. Having a woman here, at his table, it stirred memories better left buried. I can do that, Sarah said, moving toward the fire. You're a guest. I don't want to be a burden. She wrapped her arms around herself. I've been that enough. Jake handed her the coffee pot. If it makes you feel better. She took it gratefully, and they worked in companionable silence. Jake found himself stealing glances at her. Despite everything, there was a grace to her movements, a quiet dignity that her father hadn't managed to beat out of her. You're staring, Sarah said without looking up. Jake felt heat rise to his face. Sorry, don't get many visitors. How long have you lived here alone? 3 years, give or take. By choice? Jake's hand stilled on the bacon pan. Yeah, by choice. Sarah seemed to sense she'd touched something raw. She poured the coffee, strong and black, and handed him a cup. Their fingers brushed, and she pulled back quickly. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The sun climbed higher, warming the air. Jake's horses grazed in the corral, tails swishing at flies. It was peaceful, normal, except for the battered young woman sitting across from him. I should go, Sarah said suddenly. I've imposed enough. Go where? She opened her mouth, then closed it. They both knew she had nowhere. You can stay until you're healed up. Jake said, help around the place if it makes you feel better about it. Lord knows it could use a woman's touch. People will talk. Sarah repeated her concern from yesterday. I told you. I know what you told me. She met his eyes. But you don't understand. My reputation is already hanging by a thread. If word gets out, I'm staying with a man. Alone. She shuddered. It won't matter that you saved me. They'll make it into something ugly. Jake set down his coffee cup harder than necessary. Then we don't tell anyone. And when my father comes looking, I'll handle him. Sarah studied him. You're not afraid of him. Should I be? He's mean when he's sober and meaner when he's drunk. And he's got friends. Big Tom isn't the only one he does business with. Jake's jaw tightened. I've dealt with mean men before. Something in his tone made Sarah look at him more carefully. You're not just a rancher, are you? Jake was quiet for a long moment. I am now. She didn't press, for which he was grateful. Instead, she stood and began clearing the dishes. Jake watched her work, noting how she favored her left side, likely more bruises he couldn't see. There's a stream about a quarter mile that way, he said, pointing east. If you want to wash up, I've got a spare shirt that might fit better than... He gestured vaguely at her ruined dress. Sarah's face colored. I couldn't wear your clothes. More proper than what you've got now. Jake said practically, She considered this, then nodded. Jake fetched one of his older shirts and a pair of pants that might stay up with a belt. Sarah took them with shaking hands. "The stream's cold," he warned. "Snow melt from the mountains." "Cold sounds wonderful," she said softly. Jake busied himself with chores while she was gone, trying not to think. He repaired a section of fence, checked the horse's hooves, hauled water from the well. Anything to keep his hands and mind occupied. When Sarah returned, Jake almost didn't recognize her. His clothes hung loose on her frame, but clean and with her hair washed and braided. She looked younger, more vulnerable, somehow. "Feel better?" he asked. "Human again." She touched her face self-consciously. "Well, mostly." The day passed quietly. Sarah insisted on helping despite Jake's protests. She fed the chickens he kept for eggs, helped mend a bridle, even tried her hand at patching the barn roof until Jake made her come down, fearing she'd fall. "You're not used to being idle," Jake observed as she paced the cabin that evening. "Pa never allowed it, idle hands and all that." She laughed bitterly. Though his version of keeping busy usually involved fetching his whiskey or dodging his fists. "How long has he been like that?" Sarah sank into a chair. "Since Mama died. 8 years now. She kept him in line, mostly, after the fever took her." She shrugged. "He crawled into a bottle and never came out. And you stayed. Where would I go? I was 10 years old." She picked at a splinter in the table. "Besides, he wasn't always bad. Sometimes he'd remember I was his daughter, not just another mouth to feed or something to trade for drinking money." Jake felt that familiar cold anger building. He'd known too many men who drowned their grief in whiskey and took it out on everyone around them. "Then Big Tom started coming around," Sarah continued. "Pa owed him for horseshoes, repairs, all sorts. Tom said he'd forgive the debt if—" She couldn't finish. "You don't have to talk about it." Jake said, "Maybe I need to." She met his eyes. "Maybe I need someone to know that I fought, that I didn't just give up. I told Pa I'd rather die than let that man touch me. So Pa decided to teach me about defiance." She absently rubbed her wrists where the rope had left marks. "He waited until I was sleeping, dragged me out to that fence, said I could think about my choices while the sun baked the stubbornness out of me. Said when he came back, I'd be begging to marry anyone who'd have me." Jake's hands had clenched into fists. He forced them to relax. He was wrong. Was he? Sarah's voice was very small. "Here I am, depending on the kindness of another stranger. How is that different?" "It's different because you have a choice," Jake said firmly. "You can leave whenever you want. I won't stop you." "And go where?" The question hung between them. Then Sarah shook her head. "I'm sorry. You've been nothing but kind. I shouldn't—" "You've got every right to be suspicious." Jake interrupted. "World hasn't given you much reason to trust." They sat in silence as darkness gathered outside. Jake lit the oil lamp, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah watched the flames, seeming lost in thought. "Tell me about before," she said suddenly. "Before you were a rancher." Jake stiffened. "Not much to tell. You said you dealt with mean men. You've got scars. I can see them. And the way you wear that gun. You're no farmer playing at being tough." Jake was quiet so long Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. "Finally," he said, "I did some things I'm not proud of. Worked for people who paid well and didn't ask questions. Thought I was building a future for me and my sister. What happened to her? Fever. Same as your mother. Probably. I was away on a job when she got sick. By the time I got back," he shrugged, 15 years old. "And I left her alone to die." "That's not your fault," Sarah said softly. "Wasn't there. That's fault enough." Jake stood abruptly. "I'll bed down in the barn again." "Jake!" But he was already heading for the door. Sarah watched him go, recognizing the weight he carried. She knew about guilt, about the what-ifs that haunted sleepless nights. That night, she lay in Jake's narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. through the thin walls. She could hear him moving around in the barn. Restless. She wanted to go to him. To offer, what? Comfort? Understanding? Instead, she pulled the blanket higher and tried to sleep. But her dreams were full of her father's face, twisted with rage, and Big Tom's leering grin. She woke, gasping, heart racing. A soft knock at the door made her freeze. "Sarah, you all right?" She must have cried out. Shame flooded her. "I'm fine. Just a dream." "We all have those," Jake said quietly. "There's whiskey if you need it. Helps sometimes." Sarah almost laughed. Whiskey was what started all this. But she heard the genuine concern in his voice, the understanding of someone who knew about nightmares. "Thank you," she whispered. She heard his footsteps retreat. Sarah lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she thought about Jake Sullivan, this dangerous man who handled her with such gentleness, who gave up his bed without being asked, who looked at her bruises with fury but never once made her feel weak for having them. Tomorrow, she'd have to make decisions. Her father would come looking eventually. The town would talk. Big Tom wouldn't give up easily. But tonight, she was safe, a damaged girl and a haunted man, finding shelter in each other's silence. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in years. A week had passed in quiet routine when Jake decided to ride to town for supplies. Sarah had protested, fear flickering in her eyes at the thought of being alone, but Jake assured her he'd be back before nightfall. "Bar the door," he told her. "Don't open it for anyone but me." The ride to Cedar Ridge took 4 hours through dusty trails and sparse grassland. Jake kept his hat low and his manner unremarkable as he entered the general store. He'd learned long ago that the best way to hear gossip was to be invisible. Jake Sullivan. Old Pete behind the counter nodded. "Haven't seen you in a spell." "Been busy with the ranch." Jake set down his list. Flour, salt, coffee, fabric. The last item made Pete's eyebrows rise. "Since when do you need calico?" "Shirts are wearing thin," Jake said evenly. Pete shrugged and began filling the order. 2 men at the back of the store were talking in low voices, but Jake caught fragments. "Henderson's girl missing near 2 weeks now. Offering $50 to anyone who brings her back. Big Tom's mad as a hornet, says he paid good money." Jake forced himself to continue examining a display of ammunition, though his blood had turned to ice. $50 was serious money, enough to make people look hard. "Shame about the Henderson girl," Pete said, wrapping Jake's purchases. "Though between you and me, can't blame her for running. That father of hers." He shook his head. "What's the story?" Jake asked, keeping his voice casual. "Frank Henderson's been trying to marry her off to pay his debts. Tom Garrett had claim, but now Frank's saying she stole money when she ran. Sheriff's got papers and everything." Jake's jaw tightened. So Frank had added theft to ensure the law would help hunt his daughter. "She steal anything?" Pete snorted. "That girl never had 2 pennies to rub together. Frank drank anything of value years ago. But Tom's got the sheriff's ear, if you know what I mean." Jake paid and loaded his supplies, mind racing. As he passed the saloon, the doors swung open and Frank Henderson himself stumbled out. He was a big man gone to seed, with mean little eyes and weeks of stubble. Their eyes met. Frank squinted, trying to focus through the whiskey haze. "Sullivan." Jake nodded curtly and kept walking. "You seen my girl?" Frank called after him. "Sarah, about this high dark hair, probably telling lies about her poor old father?" "Haven't seen her," Jake said without turning. "There's money in it if you do. $50. Man could do a lot with $50. Jake mounted his horse. "I'll keep that in mind." Frank stepped closer, and Jake could smell the stale whiskey. "She's a pretty thing. My Sarah, too pretty for her own good. Man finds her. Might decide to keep her for himself." His grin was ugly. "Course, that'd be stealing. And we hang thieves in Cedar Ridge." Jake met his gaze steadily. "Good thing I mind my own business then." He rode out slowly, feeling Frank's eyes on his back. Only when Cedar Ridge disappeared behind the hills did Jake urge his horse to a gallop. The sun was already sinking toward the mountains. Sarah was pacing the cabin when he arrived, rifle in her hands. She lowered it with visible relief when she saw him. "Thought you might have left for good," she said, trying for lightness but failing. "Told you I'd be back." Jake began unloading supplies, debating how much to tell her. "Your father's in town." Sarah went still. "Did he see you?" "Yeah, he's offering $50 for your return. Says you stole from him." "Stole?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "What could I steal? He pawned Mama's wedding ring years ago." "Doesn't matter if it's true. Sheriff's got papers. Makes it legal for anyone to bring you in." Sarah sank into a chair, face pale. $50 is a fortune around here." "It is," Jake agreed. He set the calico fabric on the table. "Thought you might want a proper dress." She touched the material, blue with tiny white flowers, with wondering fingers. "I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed." That evening, as Sarah worked on cutting the fabric with borrowed scissors, Jake cleaned his guns. The familiar ritual calmed him, each piece fitting together with satisfying precision. "You're expecting trouble," Sarah observed. "Always best to be prepared." She was quiet for a moment. "I should leave before I bring that trouble to your door." "Where would you go?" "West, maybe. California. Somewhere he can't find me." Jake looked up. "You got money for that? Supplies? You know how to handle a gun? Survive on the trail?" Sarah's shoulders slumped. "No. Then you're staying put until we figure out something better." "We?" She looked at him with those dark eyes. "This isn't your fight. Jake made it mine when I cut those ropes." The next few days passed in tense watchfulness. Jake worked close to the cabin, always armed, always listening for horses. Sarah threw herself into making her dress, finding solace in the familiar work. "My mama taught me," she said one evening, showing Jake the careful stitches. "Said a woman should always be able to make her own clothes. Never know when you might need the skill." Smart woman. She was. Sarah's smile was sad. "I wonder sometimes what she'd think of all this. Her daughter, hiding out with a gunslinger." "Former gunslinger," Jake corrected. "Once a gunslinger, always a gunslinger. That's what my daddy used to say, back when he still made sense." She tied off a thread. "Is that why you quit? Your sister?" Jake set down the bridle he was mending. "Emma hated what I did, used to beg me to find honest work. I kept telling her one more job, one more payment, then we'd have enough to start over." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out all the money in the world can't bring back the dead. So you came here. Bought this place with blood money. Figured if I was going to be alone, might as well be alone somewhere Emma would have liked." She always talked about having horses, open sky. Sarah reached across the table, her fingers barely touching his hand. "She would have loved it here." Jake turned his hand over, catching her fingers briefly before pulling away. "Yeah, she would have." 2 days later, they were working with the horses when it happened. Sarah had taken to the animals naturally, her gentle manner calming even the most skittish mare. She was leading a young gelding around the corral while Jake watched, offering guidance. "That's it," he called. "Let him know you're in charge, but gentle-like." Sarah grinned over her shoulder, and for a moment she looked like any young woman, not someone running from a nightmare. Then her smile faltered. "Jake." He heard it too, horses approaching, multiple riders. Jake grabbed his rifle, pushing Sarah toward the cabin. "Inside, bar the door." "Jake, go!" She ran. Jake positioned himself by the corral fence, rifle ready but not raised. 4 riders came into view. Frank Henderson in the lead with Big Tom Garrett beside him. The other 2 Jake recognized as hired muscle from town. Sullivan. Frank reined up just outside rifle range. Smart, even drunk. "Heard you might have seen my wayward daughter." "Told you I hadn't." Big Tom spit tobacco juice. "Funny thing, someone saw you buying woman's goods in town. You taking up sewing? Sullivan? What I buy's my business. Not if you're harboring a thief." Frank said, "That's crime. Could see you hanged." Jake's finger rested on the trigger guard. "Girl would have to be a thief first. Got papers saying she is." Frank patted his coat. "Legal and binding. Papers can say anything if you pay the right people." Big Tom's face darkened. You calling us liars? I'm saying I haven't seen any girl. Now get off my land. Frank leaned forward in his saddle. Mind if we look around? Just to be sure. I mind. 4 against 1, one of the hired men said. Those ain't good odds. Jake smiled coldly. Depends on who the one is. The moment stretched taut. Jake knew they were calculating. Was finding Sarah worth potentially dying? His reputation from the old days might be enough to give them pause. Big Tom broke first. Come on, Frank. Girl's probably halfway to Mexico by now. But Frank's eyes were fixed on the cabin. Smoke's coming from your chimney. Sullivan, awful hot for a fire. I like hot coffee. Through the window, Frank said slowly. That looked like a dress to you. Tom? Jake didn't turn, but he knew Sarah must be visible. Damn. Well now, Big Tom grinned. Looks like Sullivan's been lying after all. Last warning, Jake said quietly. Get off my land, Frank laughed. Or what? You'll shoot us all? Even you ain't that fast. Sullivan. And then what happens to sweet little Sarah? The cabin door opened. Jake wanted to curse as Sarah stepped out, but he kept his eyes on the riders. Stop this, Sarah called. I'll come with you. Just leave Mr. Sullivan alone. Sarah, no, Jake said sharply. She walked toward them, head high despite her obvious fear. She was wearing the new dress. Jake noticed absurdly. It fit her well. There's my girl, Frank said. Tom's been worried sick about you. I bet he has, Sarah said. She stopped just behind Jake. I won't marry him. Pa, not for all your threats. You'll do as you're told, Frank snarled. Or I'll... What? Sarah's voice rose. Tie me to a fence again? Beat me senseless? You've done your worst. Pa, I'm not afraid anymore. You should be, Big Tom said. Your daddy signed a contract. Money's been paid. You belong to me now. I belong to no one, Sarah said fiercely. Jake felt her hand rest briefly on his shoulder. Support or farewell? He couldn't tell. Enough talk, Frank said. Tom, get your property, Sullivan. You stand aside or we'll go through you. Jake chambered a round. The sound sharp in the afternoon air. Try it. The standoff might have ended in blood if not for the dust cloud on the horizon. Another rider, coming fast. They all watched as Sheriff Watson approached, his badge glinting in the sun. Gentlemen, the sheriff said, taking in the scene. Problem here? Sullivan's got my daughter, Frank said immediately. Stole her right out from under us. That true, Miss Henderson? The sheriff asked. Sarah straightened. Mr. Sullivan saved my life. My father left me to die, and he saved me. She's lying, Frank protested. Girl's always been touched in the head. The sheriff looked at Sarah's fading bruises, at Jake's steady rifle, at the 4 men ready for violence. He sighed. Seems to me this is a family matter, not a legal one. Unless you got witnesses to this supposed theft. Frank? Frank's face purpled. I got papers. Papers saying she took money that no one saw her take? The sheriff shook his head. That won't hold up. And you know it. What about my contract? Big Tom demanded. I paid good money. For what, Tom? You can't buy people. War settled that question. The sheriff's voice was mild, but there was steel underneath. Miss Henderson, you want to press charges for assault? Those bruises tell a pretty clear story. Sarah glanced at Jake, then shook her head. I just want to be left alone. You heard her, the sheriff said. I suggest you boys head back to town. Now! For a moment, Jake thought Frank might do something stupid. His hand was twitching toward his gun, but Big Tom grabbed his arm. Come on, this ain't over, but it ain't the time neither. They rode off slowly, Frank shooting murderous looks over his shoulder. The sheriff lingered. This won't end here, he told Jake quietly. Frank's got pride, and Tom's got money invested. You watch yourself. Always do. The sheriff tipped his hat to Sarah. Ma'am, you need anything, you come see me. Might not be able to do much, but I'll do what I can. After he left, Sarah's legs gave out. Jake caught her before she hit the ground, holding her as she shook. "You did good," he murmured. "Real good. They'll be back," she whispered against his shirt. "They'll never stop." Jake's arms tightened around her. "Then we'll be ready." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, they stood there in the dusty yard, two broken people, finding strength in each other. The storm was coming. They both knew it. But for now, for this moment, they were safe. Together. The storm hit 3 days later with a fury that seemed to shake the very mountains. Lightning split the sky while thunder rolled across the valley like artillery fire. Jake had seen it coming in the way the horses grew restless and the air turned heavy. "Going to be a bad one," he told Sarah as they secured the shutters. She nodded, helping him drive the horses into the barn. They worked in practiced tandem now. No words needed. In the weeks since the confrontation with her father, they'd fallen into an easy rhythm. Careful spaces maintained. Boundaries respected. Yet somehow growing closer despite it all. The first fat raindrops were falling when they made it inside. Within minutes, the gentle patter became a roar. Wind howled around the cabin like a living thing, seeking any weakness. "The roof's been patched, but—" Jake glanced up as the rafters groaned. "It'll hold," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. She busied herself lighting lamps against the premature darkness. They ate a cold supper, the stove unlit to prevent any chance of fire in this wind. Sarah had made biscuits that morning, and there was dried beef and preserves. Simple fare. But Jake noticed how much better he'd been eating since she arrived. How much better everything was. A violent gust slammed the cabin, and something above them cracked. Jake was on his feet instantly. Looking up, water began dripping, then streaming through a new gap in the roof. "The patch gave way," he said, grabbing a bucket, but the hole was widening, rain pouring in. "We need to move everything," Sarah called over the storm, already dragging his trunk away from the leak. They worked frantically, pushing furniture, saving what they could. But the water kept coming, pooling on the floor, soaking into everything. Another section of roof peeled back with a shriek of protesting wood. "It's not going to hold," Jake shouted. "We need shelter." Sarah looked around the flooding cabin. The barn would be no better in this wind, but there was the root cellar. Tiny, but solid, dug into the hillside years ago. "The cellar?" she called back. Jake nodded. They grabbed what they could, blankets, food, his guns, and fought their way outside. The wind nearly knocked Sarah down. Jake caught her arm, pulling her against him as they struggled through the mud and driving rain. The cellar door fought them, but Jake wrenched it open. They tumbled inside, pulling it shut behind them. The sudden quiet was almost shocking, though the storm still raged muffled above. Jake lit the single lamp kept down here. The space was cramped, maybe 6 feet by 8, lined with stone and meant for storing vegetables, not sheltering people. Shelves held a few remaining jars from last harvest, and there was barely room to stand. They stood, dripping, catching their breath. Sarah's hair had come loose, hanging in wet ropes around her face. Her dress, the blue calico she'd made, clung to her frame. Jake tried not to notice, focusing instead on arranging their salvaged supplies. "We'll be here a while," he said unnecessarily. Sarah wrung out her hair. "At least we're safe." They spread the damp blankets on the earthen floor, trying to create some barrier against the cold. The space was too small to maintain any real distance. When they sat, their shoulders touched. "I'm sorry about your cabin," Sarah said quietly. "It's just wood and nails. Can be rebuilt. Your sister's books were in there. I saw them on the shelf." Jake's throat tightened. He'd forgotten about Emma's small collection, saved all these years. "Yeah," Sarah's hand found his in the lamplight. "I'm sorry," she said again. They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage overhead. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The air grew thick with their proximity, their shared warmth the only defense against the creeping cold. "You're shivering," Jake noticed. "I'm fine." But she wasn't. Her lips had a blue tinge, and tremors ran through her body. Jake hesitated, then opened his arms. "Come here, we need to share warmth, or we'll both freeze." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then moved into his embrace. Jake pulled the driest blanket around them both, trying to ignore how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to have her in his arms. "Better?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Yes." Hers was barely a whisper. The storm seemed to intensify, shaking the earth above them. Sarah pressed closer, and Jake felt her heart racing against his chest. Or maybe that was his own. "Jake?" Her voice was very small. "Yeah, I'm scared." He tightened his arms around her. "Storm will pass. They always do. Not of the storm." She tilted her head back, looking up at him. Her eyes were huge in the lamplight. Of what I feel when you look at me." Jake's breath caught. "Sarah, I know it's not proper. I know I'm too young, too damaged, too much trouble, but I can't help it." Her hand came up to rest against his cheek. "You make me feel safe. You make me feel alive." "You don't know what you're saying," Jake managed. "You're grateful. That's all. It's not—" She silenced him with a kiss. Gentle, uncertain, barely a brush of lips. But it set something loose in Jake, something he'd kept chained since the day he'd found her. For a heartbeat, he held still. Then his hand came up to cradle the back of her head, and he kissed her properly. She made a small sound, surprise or pleasure, and melted against him. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We shouldn't," Jake said, even as his arms refused to release her. "Why?" Sarah challenged. "Because of what people might say? Because I'm supposed to be ruined? Because you think you're too old or too dangerous? All of that. I don't care about any of it." She kissed him again, more confident now. "I care about you." Jake groaned, his last defenses crumbling. He pulled her closer, kissing her with all the hunger he'd been suppressing. Sarah responded eagerly, innocently, her hands tangling in his wet hair. The lamp flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. But they didn't need light. Touch was enough. The warmth of skin, the whisper of breath, the trembling exploration of two souls finding each other in the dark. "Are you sure?" Jake whispered against her neck, giving her one last chance to retreat. "I've never been more sure of anything," she breathed back. What followed was clumsy and tender by turns. Jake tried to be gentle, mindful of her inexperience, of all she'd been through. But Sarah was no passive participant. She met him with courage and growing passion, trusting him with her vulnerability, offering her own strength in return. When the storm finally quieted in the pre-dawn hours, they lay entwined on their makeshift bed. Sarah's head rested on Jake's chest, listening to his heartbeat. His fingers combed slowly through her drying hair. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we'll figure it out together." "Together," she repeated, like a promise. They emerged from the cellar as the sun broke the horizon, revealing the storm's devastation. Half the cabin roof was gone, the interior soaked and ruined. One wall of the barn had collapsed. Debris littered the yard, but the horses had survived. Huddled in the remaining shelter, the chickens emerged from their coop, ruffled but intact. And despite everything, Jake found himself almost smiling. "It's a mess," Sarah said, surveying the damage. "Yeah," Jake pulled her against his side. "But we're alive. Rest can be fixed." She looked up at him, and in the morning light he could see marks on her neck, her lips swollen from kisses, evidence of what had passed between them in the dark. She didn't seem ashamed. If anything, she looked radiant. "Jake Sullivan," she said with a small smile. "What have we done?" "Something that's going to complicate everything," he admitted. "Good." She stood on her toes to kiss him briefly. "I was getting tired of simple." They spent the morning salvaging what they could. Jake's books, Emma's books, were ruined, but Sarah's sewing basket had somehow survived. along with most of their food stores and, crucially, Jake's weapons. As they worked, Jake found himself watching Sarah differently. The careful distance he'd maintained was gone, replaced by something tender and protective and possessive all at once. When she caught him looking, she'd blush but smile, that new confidence shining through. They were clearing debris from the cabin when Jake spotted riders in the distance. His hand went immediately to his gun. "Company," he said quietly. Sarah moved behind him, but her chin was raised. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. But it was only Sheriff Watson, picking his way carefully through the storm damage. "Hell of a blow," he observed, dismounting. "You folks all right?" "We survived," Jake said carefully. The sheriff's eyes took in Sarah's appearance, Jake's protective stance, the ruined cabin. Something knowing flickered across his face, but he kept his thoughts to himself. "Reason I came out," he said instead. "Wanted to warn you, Frank Henderson's been drinking heavy since that day, making threats, and Big Tom's been talking to some unsavory types from the mining camps. Let him come," Jake said flatly. "That's what I'm afraid of." Watson sighed. "Look, I know it ain't ideal, but have you considered moving on? Both of you? Start fresh somewhere they can't find you." Sarah's hand found Jake's. "This is our home," she said simply. The sheriff looked between them, then nodded slowly. "Figured you'd say that. Just be careful. Storm damage is going to keep folks busy for a few days. But after that, after he left, Jake and Sarah stood in the ruins of their cabin. So much destroyed in one night. But somehow, looking at her, Jake couldn't bring himself to regret any of it. "He's right," Jake said finally. "It's going to get worse before it gets better." Sarah threaded her fingers through his. "Then we'd better get to work. This roof won't fix itself." Jake looked at her, this young woman who'd been through hell and come out stronger, who'd given herself to him with such trust, who stood ready to face whatever came next. "No," he agreed, pulling her close. "But we'll fix it, together." The sun climbed higher, drying the storm-soaked earth. There was work to be done, danger to face, a life to rebuild, but for now, for this moment, they had each other. It was enough. It was everything. The days following the storm brought a strange peace. Jake and Sarah worked side by side, rebuilding the cabin, their new intimacy coloring every interaction. A brush of hands while passing lumber, a stolen kiss behind the barn, the way Sarah would hum while cooking, small things that made Jake's chest tight with an emotion he didn't dare name. But underneath the contentment lay tension. They both knew this calm couldn't last. It broke on a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after the storm. Sarah woke to find Jake already dressed, checking his weapons with methodical precision. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "Riders coming. 4, maybe 5. His voice was steady, businesslike, the gunslinger showing through. "Get dressed. Pack what you can carry." Sarah's hands shook as she pulled on her dress. "Is it my father?" "Most likely." Jake strapped on his gun belt. "Sarah, I need you to listen. If this goes bad, stop." She moved to him, placing her hands flat against his chest. "Don't talk like that. If this goes bad," he continued firmly, "you take the bay mare and ride north. There's a town called Prosperity about 2 days' ride. Find the church, ask for Reverend Michael Blake. Tell him Jake Sullivan sent you. He'll help. I'm not leaving you. You will if I tell you to." His hands covered hers. "Promise me, Sarah. I can't do what needs doing if I'm worried about you." She looked up at him, this man who'd saved her, sheltered her, loved her with a gentleness she hadn't known existed. The morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. "I promise," she whispered. "But only if you promise to try to come back to me." Jake pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Always." The riders came into view as the sun climbed higher. Frank Henderson led them, flanked by Big Tom and 3 men Jake didn't recognize. Hard cases from the mining camps, by the look of them. Hired guns. Jake positioned himself in front of the cabin, rifle ready. Sarah watched from the window, her own hand steady on the shotgun he'd taught her to use. "Sullivan!" Frank's voice was slurred despite the early hour. "Time to settle accounts." "Nothing to settle. Frank, ride on. You took what's mine." Frank swayed in his saddle. "My property. My daughter." "I'm nobody's property," Sarah shouted from inside. Frank's face darkened. "You shut your mouth. Girl, I'll deal with you after." "No," Jake said quietly. "You won't." One of the hired guns, a scarred man with dead eyes, spoke up. "Mister, we got no quarrel with you. Just here to collect the girl and the bounty. Stand aside, and no one needs to die. Except Sarah." Jake said, "You think I don't know what happens to her if she goes back? Tom there already paid for her. What's the plan? Tom? Beat her until she's broken? Lock her up until she agrees to warm your bed? Big Tom spit tobacco juice. Man's got rights when he pays for something." "You paid her father, not her. And last I checked, we fought a war about owning people." "Enough talk," Frank snarled. "Boys, take him." The scarred gunman hesitated. "That's Jake Sullivan. The Colorado Jake Sullivan." "You didn't mention that?" "Henderson. I don't care if he's Wild Bill himself." Frank shouted, "I paid you to do a job." But the professionals were reconsidering. Jake's reputation from his outlaw days still carried weight. 1 man against 5 weren't good odds, but not when that one man was known for being death with a gun. "New deal," the scarred man said. "The girl comes willing, no one shoots, everyone goes home. Except Sarah doesn't get to go home." Jake said, "She gets to go to hell. Not our problem." Jake smiled coldly. "I'm making it your problem." The moment stretched taut as wire. Frank's hand twitched toward his gun. Big Tom shifted in his saddle. The 3 professionals watched Jake with the careful attention of predators recognizing another predator. Then Sarah stepped out of the cabin. "No!" Jake started to turn, but her voice stopped him. "It's all right, Jake." She walked forward, head high, the very picture of courage. "I won't let anyone die for me." "Sarah, get back inside," Jake commanded, but she kept coming, moving to stand beside him. "Hello? Pa, Tom, gentlemen." Her voice was steady as stone. "I hear there's been some confusion about my situation." Frank's eyes narrowed. "No confusion. Girl, you're coming home." "No," Sarah said simply. I'm staying here with the man I love, the man who's shown me more kindness in 2 months than you showed me in 18 years. "Love?" Big Tom laughed harshly. "You're a child. You don't know nothing about love." "I know it doesn't come with fists," Sarah shot back. "I know it doesn't sell what it claims to care about. I know it doesn't leave someone tied to die in the sun." "You lying little." Frank went for his gun. Several things happened at once. Jake shoved Sarah behind him, his rifle coming up. The scarred professional drew with lightning speed, but not at Jake. His gun pointed at Frank. "Nobody paid me to die for your family drama," the gunman said. "Drop it, Henderson." Frank froze, his revolver half out of its holster. "You're taking his side?" "I'm taking the side that keeps me breathing." The professional glanced at Jake. "Heard about what you did in Colorado Springs? That true? 7 men in under 10 seconds? 8, Jake corrected. "But who's counting?" The gunman grinned humorlessly. "That's what I thought. Henderson, you want the girl so bad, call her out yourself. Leave us out of it. I paid you. Not enough to face down Jake Sullivan." The 3 professionals turned their horses. "We're done here." "Cowards!" Frank screamed after them. "Yellow-bellied cowards." Now it was 3 against 2. Better odds, but Big Tom was looking uncertain, and Frank was drunk enough to be unpredictable. "It's over, Frank," Jake said. "Take what's left of your pride and go home." "She's my blood," Frank said desperately. "My daughter, she belongs with me. I stopped belonging to you the day Mama died," Sarah said from behind Jake. "Maybe before. You just never noticed because you were too deep in the bottle." "Everything I did was for you," Frank protested. "Keep a roof over your head, food in your belly, bruises on my skin," Sarah interrupted. "Fear in my heart. That's what you gave me, Pa. That and a death sentence with Tom Garrett. Big Tom's face flushed. Now hold on. 60 years old, Sarah continued relentlessly. Hands like hammers and a temper worse than my father's. That's who you were selling me to. Your own daughter. Pa, how much did he pay? How many bottles of whiskey was I worth? Frank's face had gone purple. You don't understand. I got debts. Your debts, your drinking, your choices. Why should I pay for them? Because you're mine, Frank roared. My blood, my property, my... The shot came from behind them all. Everyone spun to see Sheriff Watson approaching, his rifle pointed skyward, smoke drifting from the barrel. That's enough, the sheriff said tiredly. Frank, Tom, you're done here. She's my daughter, Frank said weakly. She's a grown woman who's made her choice. Watson replied, and frankly, Frank, after what I've been hearing around town about how you treated her, you're lucky she doesn't press charges. This is all his doing. Big Tom pointed at Jake. Turned her head with his outlaw ways. Jake Sullivan's been nothing but law-abiding since he settled here. The sheriff interrupted, which is more than I can say for you. Tom, heard some interesting things about your business practices. Might be worth investigating. Tom paled. Now wait just a minute. Or you can ride out now and we'll call it square. Watson's voice was steel. Your choice. For a moment, Jake thought Frank might do something stupid. The man's hand hovered near his gun, his whole body shaking with rage and alcohol. Pa, Sarah said softly, let me go. Please, if you ever loved me at all, let me be happy. Something in Frank seemed to break. His shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. You were all I had left of her, he mumbled. Of your mother. Every time I look at you, I know, Sarah said gently. But I'm not her, Pa, and drinking won't bring her back, neither will hurting me. Frank looked at her for a long moment, and Jake saw a flash of the man he might have been before grief and whiskey twisted him. She'd hate what I've become, Frank said quietly. She'd want you to do better. Sarah replied, It's not too late. Pa, it's never too late. Frank turned his horse without another word. After a moment, Big Tom followed, muttering curses. They rode away slowly, two broken men nursing different kinds of wounds. Sheriff Watson dismounted, watching them go. That was well handled. Miss Henderson. Sullivan, Sarah corrected softly. Sarah Sullivan. Jake turned to stare at her. She met his gaze steadily, a small smile playing at her lips. That is, she added, if Jake will have me. Sarah. Jake's voice was rough. You sure about this? I'm not an easy man to live with. Got too much past. Too many ghosts. We've all got ghosts, Sarah said. Maybe together we can finally let them rest. Sheriff Watson cleared his throat. Circuit judge comes through next month. Could make it official then, if you're so inclined. Jake couldn't speak past the tightness in his throat. This brave, beautiful woman wanted to bind her life to his. After everything she'd been through, she was choosing him. Jake? Sarah's confidence wavered. If you don't want... He silenced her with a kiss, not caring that the sheriff was watching. When they broke apart, Sarah was breathless and smiling. Is that a yes? She asked. That's a yes, Jake confirmed. Though Lord knows why you'd want a broken-down gunslinger with more scars than sense. Because that broken-down gunslinger saved my life, Sarah said, and then taught me how to save my own. Sheriff Watson mounted his horse, tipping his hat. I'll let the judge know to expect you. And Jake, welcome to respectability. It's not as boring as you'd think. After he left, Jake and Sarah stood in the morning sun, arms around each other. The cabin still needed repairs. There would be talk in town, disapproval from proper folks. Frank might cause more trouble, or drink himself to death trying to forget. But none of that mattered right now. Sarah Sullivan, Jake said, testing the words. I like the sound of that. So do I, she said, standing on her toes to kiss him again. So do I. They went inside together, leaving the ghosts and the past in the dust where they belonged. There was a future to build now. One board, one day, one kiss at a time. And for the first time in years, Jake Sullivan believed in tomorrow. The weeks leading to the circuit judge's arrival should have been peaceful. Jake and Sarah worked the ranch, rebuilt what the storm had taken, and found joy in small moments, shared meals, quiet evenings, the simple pleasure of waking up together. But underneath, they both sensed trouble brewing like another storm on the horizon. It started with small things: dead chickens left at their gate, fences cut in the night, their water source mysteriously fouled with animal carcasses. Jake cleaned up each mess without comment, but his vigilance increased. He started wearing his gun even for simple chores, kept the rifle within easy reach. "Someone's trying to scare us off," Sarah said one morning, staring at their vandalized garden. "Tom Garrett," Jake said grimly. "Frank might have given up, but Tom's got money and pride invested." Sarah knelt among the destroyed vegetables she'd carefully tended. "All that work. We'll replant." Jake helped her to her feet. "Many times as it takes." But the harassment escalated. One night, shots rang out, shattering their windows. Jake pushed Sarah to the floor, covering her body with his as glass rained down. "Stay down," he commanded, grabbing his rifle. He peered through the broken window, but saw only darkness. More shots came from different directions, multiple shooters, keeping them pinned. "They're not trying to hit us," Jake realized. "Just want us scared." "It's working," Sarah admitted, pressed against the floor. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it started. In the morning, they found a note nailed to their door. "Last warning, the girl leaves, or you both burn." Sarah's hands trembled as she read it. "Maybe I should." "No," Jake said firmly. "You run now. They'll hunt you forever. We make our stand here." He rode to town that day, leaving Sarah barricaded in the cabin. Sheriff Watson listened to his report with a grave expression. "I'll talk to Tom, but without proof." The sheriff spread his hands helplessly. "His friends will swear he was playing cards all night. I know how this works," Jake said. "Just wanted it on record before things get worse." Watson leaned forward. "How much worse are you expecting?" "Tom wants Sarah. He's not getting her. Man like that doesn't accept being told no." Jake stood. "When it comes, I'll do what's necessary. Want you to remember that?" He made other stops in town: the general store for ammunition, the blacksmith for some specific items. Word spread quickly. Jake Sullivan was preparing for war. At the barber shop, he encountered unexpected support. "That Sarah's a good girl," the barber said quietly. "What her father did weren't right. Most folks know it, even if they won't say." "Appreciate that," Jake said. "You might have more friends than you think, if trouble comes." The man continued, concentrating on his work. "Just saying." Jake filed that away. Maybe the town's silence didn't mean approval of Tom Garrett's methods. He returned home to find Sarah cleaning the broken glass, trying to board up the windows. She'd changed. The frightened girl he'd first rescued was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd found her strength. "We need to talk about something," she said that evening. Jake set down the gun he was cleaning. "All right. If something happens to me—" "Sarah, listen," she insisted. "If something happens, I want you to know that these weeks with you have been worth everything. Worth the fear, the uncertainty, all of it. You gave me something I never thought I'd have." "What's that?" "A choice," she said simply. "My own life, my own decisions. Even if it ends tomorrow, I gotta choose who to love. That's more than most women get." Jake pulled her into his arms. "Nothing's going to happen to you. You can't promise that. Watch me." His voice was fierce. "I've lost everyone I've ever loved. Not you." "Not this time." They held each other as darkness fell, both aware that Tom Garrett's patience was running out. The attack came 3 nights later. Jake woke to the smell of smoke. He shook Sarah awake, his mind already calculating. The barn. They'd fired the barn. "Get dressed! Quick!" They stumbled out to find the barn fully engulfed. flames leaping toward the main cabin. The horses were screaming in terror. Without thinking, Jake ran toward the inferno. "Jake, no!" Sarah screamed, but he was already throwing open the barn doors, dodging flames to reach the horses. They burst out in a panic, nearly trampling him. He counted quickly, all accounted for, though his favorite mare had burns along her flank. "There they are!" a voice shouted. Men emerged from the darkness, 6, 8, maybe more. Tom Garrett led them, his face twisted with rage in the firelight. "Burn them out like rats," Tom commanded. "The man resists. Shoot him. The girl comes with us." Jake pushed Sarah behind the water trough. "Stay down. I'm not hiding while you— Stay down!" He drew his revolvers. "Tom, this is between us. Let the others go. You had your chance. Sullivan. Should have minded your own business." The first shot came from Jake's left. He spun, fired, and a man cried out. Then everything erupted. Jake had lived through plenty of gunfights, but never one where he had so much to lose. He fired with deadly precision, using the flickering shadows cast by the burning barn. Men scattered, seeking cover. A bullet whined past his ear. Another struck the trough, sending water spouting. Jake counted his shots, made each one matter. 2 men down, 3, but there were too many, and they were spreading out, trying to flank him. Then Sarah rose from behind the trough, the shotgun in her hands. She fired, and a man who'd been creeping along the cabin wall spun and fell. "I told you to stay down," Jake shouted. "And I told you we're in this together." She ducked as return fire splintered wood around her. They fought side by side, Jake's experience and Sarah's determination making them more formidable than Tom had expected. But ammunition wasn't infinite, and the fire was spreading. Just when Jake thought they were overwhelmed, new gunfire erupted from the darkness. Riders burst into the yard, Sheriff Watson and a half-dozen townsmen. "That's enough. Tom," Watson shouted. "Drop your weapons, all of you." The tide turned quickly. Tom's hired guns, faced with the sheriff and angry citizens, threw down their guns. Tom himself stood frozen, watching his plans crumble. "You can't do this," he said desperately. "I got rights." "You've got nothing," Watson said. "Arson, attempted murder, kidnapping. You're done, Tom." As the sheriff's men rounded up the attackers, Jake found Sarah. She was trembling now, reaction setting in. "You all right?" he asked, checking her for injuries. "I shot someone," she whispered. "I actually shot someone. To save us," Jake said firmly. "To save our life together." Nothing wrong in that. The barn collapsed in a shower of sparks, taking with it their winter hay, tools, tack. But the cabin had been saved, and more importantly, they were alive. Reverend Blake appeared among the townsmen, an old Spencer rifle in his hands. "Heard there was trouble," he said mildly. "Thought I might be needed." Other faces emerged, the barber, the general store owner, men who'd stayed silent but watched, waiting for the right moment to act. "Why?" Jake asked them. "Why risk yourselves for us?" The barber spoke up. "Because what's right is right, and because some of us remember what you did for the widow Perkins when her farm was failing, or how you helped dig out the miller's well without asking for payment. You might think you're alone out here, Sullivan, but you're not." Sarah was crying now, overwhelmed by the unexpected support. The Reverend patted her shoulder gently. "The judge arrives next week," he said. "I'd be honored to perform the ceremony, if you'll have me." Through her tears, Sarah smiled. "We'd like that." As dawn broke, the yard looked like a battlefield. The barn was gone, reduced to smoldering ruins. Bodies of Tom's men were laid out, some dead, others wounded and groaning. Tom himself sat in shackles, his empire of fear finally broken. Jake surveyed the damage, calculating what it would take to rebuild. It would be hard, starting over with winter approaching. But as Sarah slipped her hand into his, he found he didn't care. "I'm sorry about the barn," she said. "It's just wood and nails." Jake echoed his words from the storm. "We'll rebuild. Together, together." Sheriff Watson approached. looking tired but satisfied. Tom and his boys will stand trial. Given what they did here, plus what we're finding out about his other activities, he won't be troubling anyone for a long time. And my father? Sarah asked quietly. Left town yesterday, Watson said gently. Heard he was heading east, maybe to dry out, maybe to drink himself to death somewhere else. Either way, he's gone. Sarah nodded, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. Relief, sadness, and perhaps a touch of hope that her father might find redemption far from here. As the sun climbed higher, neighbors began arriving with tools, lumber, offers of help. The same community that had seemed indifferent to Sarah's plight now rallied around them. We'll have a barn raising, declared Hermann Schmidt, the German farmer from the next valley. Before winter comes, it's good to build new things after darkness. Ja. Jake found himself surrounded by people offering assistance, advice, friendship. After years of self-imposed isolation, it was overwhelming and oddly warming. Sarah squeezed his hand. Look at that. The lone gunslinger has a community. Seems I do, Jake said wonderingly. When did that happen? When you chose love over loneliness. Reverend Blake said, overhearing. It changes everything, doesn't it? As the yard filled with helpful neighbors, as plans were made for rebuilding and renewal. Jake understood the truth of those words. He'd spent years running from connection, from the risk of loss. But Sarah had changed that. She'd made him brave enough to stay, to fight, to build something worth defending. No more running, he murmured to her. No more hiding. She agreed. They stood together among the ashes and hope, surrounded by unexpected friends, facing a future that finally seemed bright despite the darkness they'd survived. The judge would come, vows would be spoken, and a new life would begin. But really, Jake thought as Sarah smiled up at him, it had already begun. The moment he'd cut those ropes and chosen to save her, they'd both been reborn. The rest was just making it official. The judge arrived on a Tuesday, but by then Jake and Sarah had already fled into the mountains. The news had come with a traveling merchant the day before. Tom Garrett had escaped custody during a transfer. And worse, Frank Henderson's body had been found in a ravine, shot in the back. The timing was too convenient, the message too clear. Tom's cleaning up loose ends, Sheriff Watson had warned, riding out at dawn. And he's got friends in high places. That judge coming tomorrow? He's in Garrett's pocket. You stay here. There'll be a rope waiting instead of a wedding. So they ran. Jake packed what they could carry, ammunition, food, bedrolls, the little money he had saved. Sarah wore men's clothing for easier riding, her hair tucked under a hat. They took 2 horses and a pack mule, leaving before the sun was fully up. The mountains rose before them like a promise and a threat. Jake knew these peaks from his outlaw days. Treacherous paths where a man could disappear or die trying. But they were also where a careful couple might find shelter until the heat died down. How long? Sarah asked as they climbed higher, the ranch disappearing behind ridges and forest. Until Tom makes a mistake, Jake said. Men like him always do. Or until Watson can get federal marshals involved. The territorial governor doesn't like Garrett. Too much power in one man's hands. They rode in tense silence, Jake constantly checking their back trail. By afternoon, his vigilance was rewarded. Dust clouds in the valley below. Riders, moving fast. They're coming, he said quietly. Sarah's face was pale but determined. How far behind? 4 hours, maybe 5. We need to move faster. They pushed harder, taking risks on narrow trails. Jake's mare stumbled once, sending rocks clattering down a cliff face. Sarah's horse shied at a snake, nearly throwing her, but they kept climbing, driven by the knowledge of what waited behind. As dusk approached, Jake led them off the main trail into a narrow canyon he remembered from years past. A cave system honeycombed the rock here, confusing enough to lose pursuers if they were lucky. We'll rest here tonight, he said, helping Sarah down. She moved stiffly, not used to so many hours in the saddle. They made a cold camp, no fire to give away their position. Huddled together in the cave mouth, they ate dried meat and watched darkness swallow the mountains. Somewhere in that darkness, Armed men hunted them. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "This is all because of me." "No," Jake said firmly. "This is because Tom Garrett's a mad dog who needs putting down. None of this is your doing. If you'd never found me, then I'd still be alone, dying a little more each day." He pulled her closer. "Whatever happens, I regret nothing." In the night, they heard horses on the trail below. Voices carried on the still air, frustrated, angry. The searchers had lost the trail in the dark. Jake and Sarah lay motionless, hardly breathing, until the sounds faded. They moved at first light, going deeper into the mountains. Jake aimed for a place he'd used before, a hidden valley with water and game. Defensible, but not a trap. If they could reach it, they might survive long enough for help to come. The second day was harder. Snow appeared on the higher peaks, and the air grew thin. Sarah never complained, but Jake saw her exhaustion. They were rationing food already, and the horses were struggling. "There," Jake pointed to a notch between two peaks. "Through there." The pass was treacherous, barely wide enough for the horses. Wind howled through it, threatening to tear them from the narrow path. But beyond lay the valley, green despite the altitude, fed by snowmelt springs. They made it through just as another storm rolled in. This time they had better shelter, an old trapper's cabin, abandoned but solid. As rain lashed the mountains, they built their first fire in 2 days. "How did you know about this place?" Sarah asked, warming her hands. "Hid here once before, after a job went bad." Jake stared into the flames. 3 weeks I stayed, waiting for the law to give up. Longest 3 weeks of my life. And now it doesn't seem so bad. He managed a smile. Better company this time. They settled into a strange routine. Jake hunted and set snares. Sarah found edible plants, mended their clothes, kept the cabin livable. They lived like the mountain folk of old, simple and hard, but free. At night, they talked about the future. "California," Sarah suggested one evening. "We could start over. New names, new life." "Maybe," Jake said. "Or north to Canada. Lots of space up there." But neither spoke of the immediate problem. Winter was coming, and they couldn't stay here forever. Their supplies were running low, and Jake's ammunition wouldn't last if Tom's men found them. 2 weeks into their mountain exile, they saw riders in the valley below. Jake watched through his field glasses as men searched the tree line. "They're persistent," he muttered. "Tom must really want me." Sarah said bitterly, "It's not about you anymore. It's about his pride. He can't let us get away with defying him." Jake lowered the glasses. "They're leaving, but they'll be back." That night, curled together for warmth, Sarah spoke her deepest fear. "What if we're never free? What if we spend our whole lives running?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Then we run together. That's still better than the alternative." "Is it?" She turned to face him in the darkness. "You had a life before me, a home, peace." "I had existence," Jake corrected. "You gave me life." The next morning brought troubling news. Smoke signals from the lower valleys. Jake recognized the pattern from his outlaw days. Tom had hired Indian trackers. "We need to move again," he said. But Sarah was at the cabin door, staring at the dawn sky. "Jake, look!" He joined her and felt his heart sink. Snow was falling, not the light dusting of early autumn, but heavy, serious snow. Winter had come early to the high country. "We try to move in this, we'll die," Jake said quietly. "But if we stay, they'll find us." Sarah leaned against him. "Either way, it ends." "Not yet," Jake said fiercely. "Not like this." They spent the day preparing, reinforcing the cabin, setting up defensive positions, rationing what little they had left. As the snow continued to fall, transforming the valley into a white wilderness, they made their peace with what was coming. "I want you to know something," Sarah said that night. "However this ends, these weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. You gave me love. Jake, real love, That's worth any price. Jake held her close, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. If they come, I want you to run. Take the mare, head north. We've had this conversation. Sarah interrupted. I'm not leaving you. Not now. Not ever. Stubborn woman. You wouldn't love me any other way. That was true. Jake realized. Her strength, her courage, her refusal to break. These were the things that had saved them both. The storm raged for 2 days, sealing the passes. Jake knew it was both reprieve and trap. No one could reach them, but they couldn't leave either. Their food was nearly gone, firewood running low. On the 3rd morning, the snow stopped. The world outside was transformed, pristine, beautiful, deadly. Jake was checking the horses when he saw them, dark shapes moving through the white expanse. Sarah! He ran for the cabin. They're here. She met him at the door, rifle in hand. How many? 8, maybe 10. He checked his weapons. This is it. They took their positions. Jake at the front window, Sarah at the side. The riders came on slowly, struggling through the deep snow. Jake recognized Tom Garrett in the lead, his bulk unmistakable even at distance. Sullivan! Tom's voice carried across the snow. No more running. Send out the girl, and you can go free. Go to hell, Tom! Jake shouted back. Already been. That's why I want what's mine. The first shots shattered the morning quiet. Jake and Sarah returned fire, their limited ammunition making every shot precious. The attackers spread out, using the terrain for cover. For an hour, the battle raged. Jake's deadly accuracy kept them at bay, and Sarah proved she'd learned well. Her shots disciplined and effective, but they were outnumbered, and ammunition dwindled with each exchange. Last magazine, Jake said grimly, reloading. Sarah moved to his side. Then we make them count. That's when they heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Horns, military horns echoing off the mountains. What the hell? Tom's men were looking around, confused. The answer came over the ridge. A full company of cavalry, dark blue against the snow. Federal troops, led by a marshal's banner. Tom Garrett, the lead officer's voice boomed. You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, and violation of federal law. The battle turned into a rout. Tom's men, caught between the cabin and the cavalry, threw down their weapons. Tom himself tried to run, floundering through the snow until soldiers dragged him down. Jake and Sarah emerged from the cabin, hardly believing their eyes. Sheriff Watson rode with the federal troops, grinning beneath his frost-covered mustache. Sorry it took so long, he called. Had to convince the governor that Garrett was worth sending the army after. Your friend Reverend Blake helped. Wrote letters to everyone he could think of. The federal marshal, a stern man with gray whiskers, approached. Jake Sullivan, Miss Henderson, you folks all right? We're alive, Jake said, his arm around Sarah. Good, because there's still the matter of your wedding. Judge sent this along. He produced an official-looking document. Marriage license pre-signed. All we need is someone to perform the ceremony. I'm ordained, one of the young lieutenants offered shyly. If you don't mind a battlefield wedding. Jake looked at Sarah, her face bright with tears and joy. What do you say? Want to get married in a snow-covered valley with the army as witnesses? I can't think of anything more perfect, she said. So there, with Tom Garrett in chains and federal troops standing witness, Jake Sullivan and Sarah Henderson became husband and wife. The lieutenant stumbled over some of the words. And Sarah's wedding dress was men's clothing covered in gunpowder residue. But neither cared. I now pronounce you man and wife. The lieutenant concluded, you may kiss the bride. Jake did, thoroughly, to the cheers of soldiers who'd seen too much darkness and welcomed this moment of light. As they prepared to leave the valley, the cavalry would escort them safely home. Sarah looked back at the cabin that had been their refuge. We'll come back someday, she said. When it's truly peaceful. When we're old and gray. It's a date, Mrs. Sullivan. Jake agreed. They rode down from the mountains together. No longer running, no longer hiding. Behind them, the valley kept its silence, waiting for their promised return. Ahead lay home, rebuilding, and a life lived in the open. The sun broke through the clouds as they descended, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose. It felt like a blessing, like the mountains themselves were wishing them well. They were free. The trial of Tom Garrett drew crowds from 3 counties. Jake sat in the courthouse, Sarah's hand in his, watching justice finally catch up with a man who'd terrorized the territory for years. The federal prosecutor laid out the evidence methodically. Murder, extortion, conspiracy, attempted kidnapping. Frank Henderson's death, meant to silence a witness, had become the rope that would hang Tom Garrett. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, Sarah squeezed Jake's hand so tight he thought his fingers might break. Garrett would hang come spring. His empire of fear was finished. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Watson shook Jake's hand. "It's over. You two can start living now." But Jake noticed Sarah's distant look. "What is it?" "My father," she said quietly. "He was a broken man, but he didn't deserve to die with a bullet in his back." Jake understood. Frank Henderson had been many things: drunk, violent, weak, but he'd still been her father. The complicated grief of losing someone who'd hurt you was something Jake knew well. They returned to find their ranch transformed. True to their word, the neighbors had raised a new barn, better than the old one. The cabin had been repaired and even expanded. A second room added, for when little ones come along, as Mrs. Schmidt had said with a wink. "I don't recognize the place," Jake said, surveying their property. "It's not the same." Sarah agreed. "It's better. It's ours." They settled into married life with the quiet joy of 2 people who'd earned their happiness. Jake found that the skills that had made him a feared gunman, patience, precision, reading the land, made him a better rancher. Sarah proved to have a gift with the horses, gentle breaking the young ones in a way that preserved their spirit while making them reliable mounts. Winter came properly this time, blanketing their valley in white. But unlike their desperate time in the mountains, this winter brought peace. Long evenings by the fire, Sarah teaching Jake to read better from the books Reverend Blake had gifted them. Jake teaching Sarah to track and hunt, skills she absorbed with her usual determination. "I want to tell you something," Sarah said one evening in late January. They were watching snow fall beyond the window, cups of coffee warming their hands. "All right." She took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a baby." Jake's cup hit the floor, coffee spreading across the boards. He stared at her, mouth open. No words coming. "Say something." Sarah laughed nervously. "You're scaring me." "A baby," he managed. "We're having a baby? Come summer, if I'm counting right." Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might break. His voice was rough when he spoke. "I never thought, after Emma, I never thought I'd have family again." "Well, now you do," Sarah said softly. "Or will. Are you happy?" "Happy?" Jake pulled back to look at her. "Sarah, I'm terrified and overjoyed and, God, I don't know the first thing about babies." "We'll learn together," she assured him. Like everything else. The news changed everything. Jake became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Sarah from doing any work until she firmly told him she wasn't made of glass. He started adding to the cabin again, a proper bedroom for the baby, a covered porch where Sarah could sit in shade come summer. Spring arrived with Tom Garrett's execution. Jake didn't attend, but Sheriff Watson brought word that it was done. The man who'd caused so much pain was gone, and with him the last shadow over their life. Sarah grew round with child as the ranch flourished. The horses Jake had saved from the fire had healed, and their foals brought good prices. The garden Sarah replanted produced abundantly. Neighbors stopped by regularly, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. "We're part of something now," Sarah marveled one day, watching Mrs. Schmidt teach her to knit tiny boots. A community, a place. Still getting used to it, Jake admitted. But it's good. The baby came on a hot July night, with Mrs. Schmidt serving as midwife and Jake pacing outside like a caged wolf. The women had banished him from the cabin, saying he was making everyone nervous. First babies take time, Reverend Blake assured him. Having ridden out to offer support, best thing you can do is pray and stay out of the way. Jake tried, but when he heard Sarah cry out in pain, he nearly broke down the door. Only Watson, physically restraining him, kept him outside. Then, as dawn broke, a different cry filled the air. High, angry, alive, Mrs. Schmidt appeared at the door, beaming. You have a daughter, Mr. Sullivan, healthy and loud as her mother. Jake stumbled inside to find Sarah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair like her mother's. Meet your daughter, Sarah whispered. Jake took the baby with shaking hands, overwhelmed by how small, how perfect she was. The infant opened her eyes, blue like his, and seemed to look right at him. Hello, little one. He managed through tears he didn't try to hide. I'm your papa, and I promise, I'll do better by you than I ever thought possible. What should we name her? Sarah asked. Jake didn't hesitate. Emma Rose Sullivan, after the aunt who would have loved her. Sarah smiled. Emma Rose, it's perfect. As the sun rose fully, bathing their cabin in golden light, Jake sat beside his wife, their daughter in his arms. He thought of all the paths that had led here, the violence, the loneliness, the desperate flight into the mountains. Every hardship seemed worth it now. What are you thinking? Sarah asked, watching him. That I used to believe I was cursed, Jake said quietly. That everyone I loved was doomed. But look at us. Look at her. Maybe the curse was just fear, and you broke it. Sarah reached up to touch the scar on his jaw, a remnant from the fight at the cabin. We broke it together. Little Emma yawned, a tiny sound that somehow held all the promise in the world. Jake kissed her forehead, then leaned over to kiss Sarah. I love you, he said. Both of you. All of us. All of us. Sarah agreed, her eyes already drooping with exhaustion. Our family. As mother and daughter slept, Jake kept watch, not from fear now, but from wonder. Outside, their ranch stretched under the morning sun, horses grazing, garden growing, mountains standing eternal guard. Inside, everything he'd never dared dream of lay peaceful in his care. He thought of that day, so many months ago now, when he'd found a girl tied to a fence, how angry he'd been at the cruelty, how certain that he was only offering temporary shelter. He couldn't have imagined it would lead to this, to love, to home, to the weight of his daughter in his arms. But the best things in life, Jake was learning, were often the ones you never saw coming. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. He opened it to find Sheriff Watson with a bundle of papers. Hate to intrude, Watson said quietly, glancing at the sleeping pair. But thought you should know. That federal marshal was so impressed with how you handled things in the mountains. He's recommending you for a deputy position. Territorial law enforcement. Good pay. Respect. Chance to help keep the peace you fought so hard to find. Jake looked at the papers, then back at his family. I'll think about it. Watson grinned. You do that. Seems to me a man who knows both sides of the law might be just what this territory needs. He tipped his hat. Give my regards to Mrs. Sullivan and little Miss Emma. After he left, Jake stood in the doorway, watching the day unfold. Maybe he would take the position. Use his skills to protect others the way he'd protected Sarah. Build a legacy Emma could be proud of. Or maybe he'd just raise horses and children here in this valley, living quietly with the extraordinary woman who'd saved him as much as he'd saved her. Either way, he realized he was home. The lonely cowboy who'd taken in a desperate girl had found something he'd never expected. Redemption, purpose, and a love worth any storm. Sarah stirred, smiling sleepily at him. Come back to bed. Your girls need you. Jake closed the door on the morning, on the past, on everything but this moment. My girls, he repeated, liking the sound of it. He crossed the room and settled beside them, one arm around Sarah, one hand resting protective on Emma's tiny form. Outside, the world went on with its business. Inside, Jake Sullivan held everything that mattered. The man who'd once believed he was meant to be alone had found his place at last. And it was right here, in a cabin built by community, with a woman who'd taught him to hope again and a daughter who proved that love, real love, could indeed conquer all. The story that began with cruelty and ropes had ended with kindness and connection. In the wild, untamed West, where hard men and harder times tested every soul, two broken people had found each other and built something whole. It was, Jake thought as sleep finally claimed him too, one hell of a happy ending. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the American frontier. I hope Jake and Sarah's journey touched your heart as it did mine. I'm curious, where in the world are you listening to this story? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like the old cowboys used to gather round campfires to share their tales. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, courage, and redemption from the Old West. And don't forget to share your thoughts. What did you think of Jake and Sarah's love story? Your comments mean the world to me and help keep these campfire tales alive. Until next time, partners.